What I'm going to talk about today is some performance work that I've done with the Dark Energy Science collaboration. Maybe I should go into Zoom now. Can someone post me the Zoom link on Slack? My Zoom is here, but it doesn't have room.
2023 Parsl question.
Ah. Yeah, I need this. Yeah. Thanks, Dan. Got it. Wrong slideshow. Okay, so there we go. Okay, so what happened was I was investigating performance for desk, and I went on an adventure over the last 2 years, and in the remaining 5 minutes, I'm going to try and summarize some of what I discovered. So here's a baseline. If you just run Parsl on this laptop with just local threads, you get about 10,000 tasks per second with a little config tweak. And that's cool. And so then I upgraded onto a NERSC Perlmutter, this lovely big shiny computer using the WorkQ executor. And with that naive configuration, I got 0.63 tasks per second. So that's quite a qualitative difference in performance and quite embarrassing. So those are the two baselines I have, and I started exploring what is going on between those two extremes. So I said 10,000 tasks per second. What I had to do there was turn off any logging. And as soon as you go back to the default of having any logging turned on, it drops immediately to 4,000 tasks per second. So it's a little bit of a cheat to get that 10,000, but I needed to do it to get the title of the talk to work. So if we go back to NERSC, first thing with WorkQ, first naive mistake is when you use high throughput executor, by default, we're doing one core per task. WorkQ by default will allocate one node for your task. So I said, all right, just use one core per task, 256 cores. We might hope for a 256 times speed up. It went up 2.8 times. Now I can get 1.68 tasks per second. This is still not very good, right? These are all no-op tasks. So the big leap is the WorkQ people implemented this thing called WorkQ code processes. WorkQ's followed on by Taskvine, and in Taskvine that's called serverless mode, which Tan talked about yesterday. It's broadly the same thing. That gets us up to 400 tasks per second. The big problem there that this solves is doing starting Python workers. So WorkQ starts by default one Python process to run a task. That's incredibly heavyweight. I saw Jameson has some motivation about why this is terrible in his talk next, so he's going to mention that. What he says applies here. That gets us up to 400 tasks per second, much better. So then I'm like, okay, now we can start turning on some more fancy functionality. Monitoring, turns out everybody loves monitoring when they use it, even though nobody really asks for it to begin with. We get a bit of a performance degradation when I turn it on, but then I turn on our in-task resource monitoring, and we drop all the way back down to 11 tasks per second. So there's various things happening here. There's more serialization happening, much more complicated. There's processes get forked the whole time. You've got to get those messages back. So I don't have a really good feel for what is really using the time there, but you can see it needs some work, right? But it does lead on to the most embarrassing performance unimprovement that I have ever made in production software in my life. That in certain execution modes, as you send more and more tasks, we get a slowdown back down to 1 task per second. And that comes from serialization in Python is very complicated. So you see things like proxy store is trying to deal with that serialization being very heavyweight. So let's try and do that in a nice way for big objects. And the problem here was not so much size in that way, but we were serializing far too much. So I was serializing a function, which then was capturing an entire module definition, which then had a linear cache. So the first task is 5 kilobytes. The millionth task is 5,000 million bytes per task, per submission. So that is just, this graph would just keep going forever, and eventually your computer would explode. And the last thing was I noticed that work queue has this queue length slowdown. It's not the total number of tasks you've submitted, but it's the total number of tasks that you have active waiting in the queue. Drops us down from that nice 400 who goes down to about 100 in my testing. And that's because it's doing a linear search over the entire task queue, because it wants to find the best task to run. It doesn't just run tasks in submission order. So the trade-off for that is that there's that cost. But I've had really good interactions with the work queue people about ways to make this work better. So it was a very good productive session. So here's a my last 20 seconds. Here's a sort of started. We could be up there, right? But actually, we start down here. We can get all the way up with work queue, and then monitoring kind of brings it down, and some of our code brings it down even further. Okay, so it's just kind of a story of my last 2 years of performance work with what I've been up to. Okay, any questions?
What's the takeaway message been? If I want to get good performance, do I need to put in?
It means don't hire me.
I think I've made that mistake.
Yeah, you've made that mistake many times.
Use your laptop.
Yeah, use my laptop. So the sort of onwards, so a lot of these performance problems have come from integration problems, right? Serialization is fast, monitoring is fast-ish, but when we sort of put them together, then they produce this generative effect that isn't there independently. And I would really like some sort of automated CI style testing, because that performance bug was there for 3 months, 6 months. And then there was no real indication that that was a problem, just users saying, well, it seems a bit slow. And I'm like, well, we've got this paper that shows it's fast. Right? So I'd like some more automated testing.
Christopher states, for traditional HPC, throughput might not be that important. Do you agree? I mean, jobs per unit time.
It's more so that the sort of motivation that drove it was more we're caring about how much overhead is being taken up. If I'm running a 30-second task, I care that 1 second of that task is being used by foolery with getting started. So it's not specifically, you could sort of take the reciprocal of one per second and say we're wasting 1 second per task. That's sort of more the driving factor. Yeah.